Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 926B, and today's date is March 23rd, 2016, and the title of the episode is "The Plan to Cover Up This Economic Collapse Has Been Put into Overdrive." Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. I just uploaded an interview with John Titus on the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. So you can go right over to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight. It'll bring you right to the video. Or you can come over to the x22report.com site, scroll down a little bit, you'll see it on the right-hand side. Or you can go to newssentinel.com. That is the site where I'm streaming in alternative media. Same thing, scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side, and you can view the video there. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, we've been reporting on the FBI and Apple and this whole charade of why the FBI needs the keys to the kingdom. And of course, this was part of their agenda to make everyone feel that if they had the keys, we could keep you all safe. Now, there are many different hackers that came out and said, listen, it's very easy to unlock the Apple cell phone. If you have the physical device, it's easily done. John McAfee came out. He demonstrated that, yes, this can be done. And we see the FBI has decided to get assistance from Israel's Cellebrite company. They are a provider of mobile forensic software, which is now helping the feds in their attempt to unlock this iPhone. Now, of course, they need to get into this iPhone to see what's in there, to see what the San Bernardino shooters were up to. And they've been making a really big stink about this entire thing, and they were trying to push an agenda which was going absolutely nowhere. And this is why I think they've backed off, because they realize the American people are not with the FBI. They were getting no traction on this whatsoever, so they needed a way out of this. And we see at this point in time is that they don't need access to everyone's cell phone. If there is a real criminal, a real terrorist, they're not going to be using their everyday devices. Think back to the time when there was no cell phones. What did people use? They used ciphers. They made up different ways of signaling whatever they're going to do. It's the same thing today. Don't you think the criminals and the terrorists, they realize that, hey, maybe I shouldn't use Facebook and Twitter and my cell phone to coordinate an attack? No, an advanced actor would never do this. This whole thing was fake, phony, and false. It was to give up your rights. That's what they were pushing, and it failed. Now, out in Ukraine, we see that German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier has said that the escalation in Ukraine, the conflict there, could occur at any time, because he's seeing multiple ceasefire violations, and he's saying that this could escalate to a full-out war. Well, yes, it could. This is where it is headed. And we know the Ukrainian forces are preparing, getting ready. We know Poroshenko has been trained by the US, UK, and other nations. We know there's a lot of weapons coming in. We know that they've been firing on the southeastern people. Already from Victoria Nuland, we know they're not going to abide by the Minsk II ceasefire agreement. And interestingly enough, Poroshenko and Erdogan have been bonding. And they're becoming closer, where they're going to help each other out and help control the Black Sea, and they're going to work with each other. And very interestingly, something happened. A Turkish cargo ship, the Lira, rammed the support of a constructed bridge over the Kerch Strait at its top speed. The incident occurred on March 19th, but we're hearing the information come out. Now, was this an accident? I really don't think so. We know this is the bridge where they're bringing in the electrical lines. And we know that Ukraine right now has been shutting off the power, shutting off the water. They're doing whatever they possibly can to put pressure on Crimea. And we know what they're trying to do here. They're trying to push their agenda. And they want another war. They want Crimea. They want the southeastern area of Ukraine. The central bankers didn't get what they paid for. What they paid for was the entire country. What Joe Biden and John Kerry wanted was the gas pipelines where their investments would flourish because they would control the gas going into Europe. Remember, Joe Biden's son was put onto the board of directors right after the coup d'etat. John Kerry's roommate was brought in right after the coup d'etat. Now, we see out in Yemen, it looks like there's a possible ceasefire that might take effect on April 10th. And the reason for this is because Saudi Arabia has been making no headway whatsoever in Yemen. Now, the U.S. military, they have stepped in to try to help out and maybe change the tide of what is happening in Yemen. The U.S. military conducted airstrikes on al-Qaeda training camps in Yemen. And we're getting reports that there's 70 that were killed, 40 civilians that were killed. Now remember, the way the U.S. looks at this is if you are against the puppet government, they designate you as a terrorist. You're al-Qaeda. And they did this in Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, of course. If they're trying to overthrow an elected government, like in Syria, they use al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and other terrorist organizations to help out. So in reality, the al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and other terrorist organizations that are trying to overthrow the elected government, they're paid mercenaries. When they look at a country where they already have a puppet government, it's the people that they're calling al-Qaeda, because there's legislation that says the U.S. is allowed to use force on terrorist organizations in these countries, mainly al-Qaeda. The new legislation, the authorization for war, allows them to go after the Islamic State or any other terrorist organization, but that one is not passed right now. So it looks like the U.S. is going in and they are bombing and doing whatever they possibly can to try to help out in the situation. So now they're getting involved in Yemen. Now we'll have to see when April 10th comes if the ceasefire holds, because Saudi Arabia is not making any headway whatsoever in Yemen at this point. Now, the U.S. bombed the University of Mosul, saying that this was an Islamic State headquarters. And what we're realizing is that there were students inside. There were civilians inside the university. And they're getting reports that there are 25 civilians that were killed here. And the U.S. government seems to do this quite a bit, where they say, oh, there's the Islamic State in here, let's go bomb it. Look what happened in the hospital in Afghanistan. And it seems like the U.S. continually hits the areas where there are civilians. Now, of course, the corporate media is not going to report on this. But what we're realizing is that it is illegal under international law to deliberately target civilian institutions unless there is unequivocal military justification, such as preventing an imminent attack. And so far in all these cases, they haven't had this. According to Rome's statute of the International Criminal Court, intentionally directing attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, charitable purposes is a serious war crime. And right now, it's starting to look like that the University of Mosul, it's just a school. That's all it was. And the U.S. might be brought up on war crimes over this. Just like in the hospital scenario in Afghanistan. Just like the different areas in Syria. And we're starting to see a pattern here. We're starting to see a pattern where the U.S. will do whatever they have to try to keep the puppet government in power. To try to keep their proxy army in the country they want it to be in. to create chaos, because they will need them later on to remove Assad and to overthrow any elected government. Now, as we know, Turkey is continually putting pressure on the Kurds. They're bombing the Kurds. They have curfews within Turkey wherever the Kurds are located. And Russia is coming out saying that Ankara, Turkey, is hindering the Kurdish forces in their fight against the Islamic State. This is why they're bombing them in Syria, bombing them in Iraq, because they're actually going after the Islamic State. And we see at this point that Turkey is trying to keep their proxy army, which is the proxy army of the United States government, central bankers, Israel, Turkey, UK, and the coalition forces, and they're trying to keep them alive. And this is why Turkey has been bombing, keeping the corridor open, so they have easy access into Turkey whenever they need to escape, get reinforcements, get supplies. And we see right now that Turkey is continually saying that ISIS is attacking them. They're bombing them. They're saying it in northern Iraq. They're saying it on the border of Syria. And that Turkey needs to retaliate. Now, this whole thing is being ginned up to start war in these areas. Because remember, the goal is always the same. Nothing has changed. Yes, we have this temporary ceasefire. Yes, the U.S. is trying to make it look good to the world. But behind the scenes, behind all of this, we see their main goal is the same, to remove Assad. This is why during the ceasefire peace talks, the main agenda that the opposition wants to continually harp on is the transition of Assad. Kerry is out in Russia. He wants to clarify from Putin and Lavrov where Russia stands on the political transition for Syria, particularly Assad. Now, I know Russia has made this perfectly clear, saying that, listen, the people must decide if Assad stays or goes. It's not up to another country or another group. Now, of course, the United States, they don't want to hear this because they don't care what the people say. If they vote Assad into power and he stays, well, the U.S. won't like this. This is not part of their agenda. So what we're seeing right now is a standstill in the peace talks. Now, Syria, they have green-lighted the humanitarian assistance to the besieged towns, and the UN is allowed now to go into 8 of the 9 of the 11 areas, and they're going to be delivering supplies to these areas. Now, Russia was delivering humanitarian aid, and they were attacked by militants while on their way to different provinces inside of Syria. And we see at this point is that the moderate rebels, the Free Syrian Army, whatever you want to call them, they don't want this humanitarian aid getting to these areas. Now, Russia is indicating that they have special forces inside of Syria at this point. And they're saying they provide additional reconnaissance for Russian airstrikes. They carry out aircraft target designation in remote areas and carry out other special tasks. And they're saying that the government forces, they have liberated about 400 settlements in Syria during the Russian air operations. They recaptured some 10,000 square kilometers, that's 3,860 square miles, from the terrorists. And they're saying that they've reduced the grip of the terrorists by half, and they've lost their initiative. And they have. And the U.S. right now, their backs are against the wall. And they realize that their fight, their goal, their agenda in the Middle East is falling apart right now. And we know at this point we've been at war for quite a while. And we haven't heard the Big Bang, where they announce we have started war, we're in World War III. But we've been fighting, think about this, in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine. We've been provoking in the Pacific. We've been fighting in many different countries in the Middle East and Africa. And at this point, the Obama administration has built more nuclear weapons, more nuclear warheads, more nuclear delivery systems, more nuclear factories than any other American president. The cost over 30 years is more than $1 trillion. Now, the U.S. is planning a new mini-nuclear bomb. It is known as the B-61 Model 12. There's never been anything like it. General James Cartwright, a former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, going smaller makes using this nuclear weapon more thinkable. In the last 18 months, the greatest buildup of military forces since World War II, led by the United States, is taking place along Russia's western frontier. Not since Hitler invaded the Soviet Union have foreign troops presented such a demonstrable threat to Russia. In Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, right next to Russia, the U.S. military is deploying combat troops, tanks, heavy weapons. This is provocation. What makes the prospect of nuclear war even more dangerous is a parallel campaign against China. Every day we hear about China, how they're becoming a threat, how they have to be contained. According to Admiral Harry Harris, the U.S. Pacific Commander, China is building a great wall of sand in the South China Sea. And what he's referring to is the airstrip in the Spratly Islands, which are the subject of dispute with the Philippines. Now, the dispute was not there until Washington pressured and bribed the government in Manila, and the Pentagon launched a propaganda campaign called Freedom of Navigation. And what does this really mean? It means freedom for American warships to patrol and dominate the coastal waters of China. Imagine this. If the American reaction, what would be the American reaction if Chinese warships did the same off the coast of California, or off the coast of New York, or down in the Gulf of Mexico? Everyone would be, oh my God, China is right at our doorstep. Well, this is what China's doing. Russia's doing the same thing. This is all about provoking war. Now, how do we get to war? How do these crazy lunatics bring us to war? Well, they start off with false flags. They start off with terror to make us believe that we need to go after a certain group, to go after a certain country. And this is what we're seeing right now. Armstrong Williams, he is saying Brussels' attack was a declaration of war against Europe and America. Right now, the U.S. government has issued travel advisories throughout Europe. And we can see with this Brussels false flag, more and more information is coming out, and it's leading us to the conclusion that this was another one of these false flags to put fear in Europe. And what's very interesting is that before the bomb went off, Brussels news media reported on the terror attacks by providing CC camera airport surveillance video on the terror attacks. The published video footage was fake. The video that they put out was a terror attack at Moscow's airport on January 24th, 2011. And what they did was they took the date, which was March 22nd of 2016, and put it on this video. And then they said, yes, this is the bombing and what's happening here in Brussels. Now, we see a lot of this, and most of the time they get caught in doing this. It's almost like when we look back in Ukraine when they said Russia was invading Ukraine, and they showed pictures back with Russian tanks from 2009, which we documented. They're doing the same thing, but this time they got caught because what happened was the video was posted at around 9:07 a.m. local time. The attacks took place approximately 8 a.m. local time. The video was identified as an airport CC surveillance, but they're not going to take the recordings and put them up that quickly, because security has to look at it, others have to look at it, and then they started comparing this and they're saying, okay, this is a complete fake. So they were trying to convince people, who knows what plan they had here, but it was completely fake. Now, right after the bomb went off, within the 24 hours to 36 hours, we know this is a false flag because they find all the evidence very, very quickly. They went into an apartment, they found the ISIS flag, they found bomb-making material, they found chemicals. Then they found a computer, which was in a trash can, and the terrorist wrote that he felt increasingly unsafe, didn't know what to do, and feared to going to prison. Well, if he feared to go to prison, why did he blow himself up? That makes no sense. And what we're seeing right now is they're trying to cover this and point the finger at the patsies. And they're doing this, and all the evidence is right there in front of them, and it's being found very, very quickly. Now, every time we see the evidence found this quickly, we know it's a false flag. All we're waiting for is the intact passports to be found, maybe taped to a bathroom wall, near a toilet, because we always find the passports later on. But this time they've already identified the people, so they don't really need the passports. But it would be funny if they did find them, just to complete the whole entire false flag story. Now, why did this happen in Brussels? Because I mentioned this yesterday, and we know that Russia and Syria, they're the main enemy of the Islamic State. They've been driving them back, and we know it's not a terrorist group, but let's pretend it is a terrorist group. And Russia has been bombing them. They have been shutting down their convoy, where they're getting their covert money supply to keep the operations going. Why would they go to Brussels? Brussels they're not attacking them. It makes no sense. Well, you have to look at it in this way. Since this is not a terrorist group, and they're trying to push an agenda, they did this in Brussels because this is kind of like the center of the European Union. Actually, NATO's headquarters is in Brussels. They want everyone on board to fight the Islamic State in Syria. This is what they do. I mean, it's ridiculous the way they do this. A terrorist group that is losing in Syria, they decide to go bomb Europe or France to bring in more troops to destroy them. I mean, the way of thinking doesn't make any sense. The only reason they do this is to bring more forces in to get Assad. And this is exactly what they're doing. Because they want a ground invasion. This is why Carter went all around. They didn't get the troops they really wanted. They got some, but they want more. They want NATO involved in this. Right now, Russia is saying there is no link to prove that the Brussels blast is connected to the arrest that they did for the Paris attacks. So they arrested the person in Brussels. There's no link to him whatsoever. Because this whole thing was part of a main agenda. Now, a terror expert is saying that the Islamic State is sending a message to the White House that we can hit schools, shopping malls, unguarded, unpatrolled areas at any time. Well, this is lone wolves, and we know that eventually what's going to happen is they're going to bring the event to the United States. Because the economic collapse is coming. They put this plan into overdrive, and they know once everything starts to deteriorate, what do they need to do? They need to control the situation. They need to start a war. They need to cover it up, and they need to control the people. So very interestingly, Israel Haaretz newspaper reports that Belgium security services and other Western intelligence agencies had advanced and precise intelligent warnings regarding Tuesday's bombings. They said they all knew about this, but they did nothing. Well, this is part of their plan. Think about this for a second. If they knew about this and they started to search every single person, set up checkpoints, lock down the entire area with more soldiers, the people would be outraged. But since this has come out, the people are going to say now, well, since you knew about this, why didn't you do anything? Well, we didn't want to make everyone feel uncomfortable. We didn't want to create checkpoints. We didn't want to do searches. We didn't want to have iris scans, fingerprints. But if you want us to do this to keep you safe, we will do this from this point on. And this is why this is going out. We will bring more troops on the ground. We will set up more security to keep you safe. We will pat down every single person. We will take your fingerprint, your DNA. And this is all in preparation for this entire collapse of the system and to take away everyone's rights. It's a perfect setup. Now, what's very interesting about all of this is that the security company, ICTS, who handles security operations at Brussels Airport, well, they were involved, and this is an Israeli company, and I have nothing against Jewish people, Christian people, Muslims. This is about governments. This is about how governments use their power in all different ways to convince the people out of fear of doing things they normally wouldn't do. But this same firm, which has operations in the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Japan, and Russia, was also involved in the security services of Amsterdam Airport at United Airlines and U.S. Airways, where we had the underwear bomber. He was able to slip through and board a Northwest Airlines Flight 253 to Detroit with explosive materials on Christmas Day of 2009. In December 2001, they somehow managed to let a deranged shoe bomber, Richard Reed, into Miami-bound flight in Paris. ICTS also somehow missed several of the alleged 9/11 hijackers who allegedly flew out of Boston Logan Airport. ICTS also handled security for London Bus Network during July 7th, 2005. So we're seeing the same exact company involved in a lot of these false flags. Now remember, we have Mossad, CIA, MI6, all involved in this. We see the Islamic State, the proxy army for the United States government, central bankers, Israel, the coalition forces, making additional threats to everyone, saying that they are not finished with what's going to happen here. And now they're saying that the lone wolf groups, they're just out there, they don't have to report to anyone, and they're acting alone. And they're all over the place. What's happening here is we're approaching the main event. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.